Another major political shift is taking place in South America. After June's election in Colombia, the nation will return to right-wing rules after a four-year run under left-wing President Gustavo Petro. Our correspondent Lucas Michtics was joined by University of Calgary Latin American political science professor Pablo Pulitzer and has more.
Professor, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation.
So let's start kind of with the very basics of this recent election in Colombia. What does Abelardo de la Esprilla's victory mean for the nation?
One thing to point out is that it's certainly a turn to the right from the previous left-wing government, but it's not a decisive turn. De la Espriella won by really a very narrow, razor-thin margin. So the deep divides that have haunted Colombia for much of its history, certainly much of its recent history, those deep divides are still very much there. I wouldn't say that this is a decisive mandate in favor of a radically new direction. It's a bare win, razor-thin margin, and many of those tensions and divisions will remain.
Professor, despite polls showing a clearer path, Mr. de la Espriella won by a tighter margin. Why did that happen?
Um, well, one of the possible factors is that the outgoing administration, the Petro administration, had not been popular for a while, and but in recent months, Petro's popularity began to go up again, and so it's possible that some of that popularity may have bled over into the support for the candidate that he supported, the left-wing candidate Cepeda. So that's certainly a possibility.
You mentioned Gustavo Petro's rising popularity toward the end. What was it that caused Senator Ivan Cepeda to not be able to really run with that to the finish line?
Well, I wouldn't say it's necessarily a question of the negatives, but rather why some of the message of De la Espriella actually stuck. The levels of insecurity have been noticeably worrisome, with a very high-profile political assassination last year that certainly scared people. And so in the context of a high-profile political assassination that in Colombia, there's a long history of this. It brought back echoes of similar kinds of political assassinations going back to the 1980s, for example. And so that message, that pro-security message, really struck a chord.
On that security note, Professor, Mr. de la Espriella has been compared to the president of El Salvador, Mr. Bukele. I'm just wondering if that security policy that Bukele has implemented in El Salvador could work in Colombia.
Sure. Many people have certainly made that comparison, and Bukele has been undoubtedly hugely influential throughout the region. And in El Salvador, his levels of popularity remain sky high. So a number of right-wing leaders recently in Latin America have made allusions to comparisons to Bukele, and De la Espriella is absolutely following on that track. Now, having said that, the desire to take a much tougher line on insecurity and other related problems, the conditions in Colombia are very different from El Salvador. El Salvador is a small country with a small population where the basic problem was gangs, essentially organized crime. It's a very serious problem, but the context is a very different one than Colombia, which is it's a larger country geographically. It's massive by comparison to El Salvador, and where historically the Colombian state has not had a strong presence, for example, enforcing the rule of law throughout the territory. There's large areas of the country and the jungles, for example, and the outlying regions where the state is barely present, if at all. So throughout Colombian history, governments from the left and the right have come to power aiming to deal with the problem of insecurity. There's been, since the middle of the 20th century especially, this has been an ongoing problem. And they've made attempts to deal with the problem of insecurity through a variety of means. Certainly military means, on the one hand, fighting the guerrillas on the one hand, but also negotiating with armed actors from the left and the right.
Professor Pablo Politzer, we will leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us.